kids will not be raised in a Jewish community. I mean, you're really literally the only Shomer Shabbos person on the island. No, Santiago has a warm and loving Jewish community. It's a great community, sure. Victor's from there, Victor Cohen. Santiago, you could do worse, you know. Venezuela as well has a wonderful Jewish community. Good morning. But the problem with being a shluchim, a shliach, is that you're trying to raise a family. Well, what's worse was, you're someplace far away, so they do distance learning. They have homeschooling, and they have a system of distance learning now through the computer that the kids do. Until the kids get to junior high or high school, and then they go off. They have boarding schools. But the problem there is for a shaliach is that there's no community and who your kids play with. The Chabad guys. Yeah, it means a messenger. So when Chabad starts a place, right, they send a guy and they support him for 3 years. A couple. They're young couples. They support them for 3 years. After 3 years, they have to raise enough local money to be independent. They support them with education material and programming material and even graphics and computer stuff. But they have to find the money to build the place. The problem is that you get sent, and it's a lifetime sentence. I mean, wherever you get sent, that's where you stay. Very few of these guys move around. Very, very few. The only exception is if you get sent as like the assistant in a place, you might get promoted to be the head guy in a different place. That's the exception. But what happens is, so the question is, if you get sent to North Hollywood, so your kids are in a community, right, or West LA. But what happens if you get sent to Mel? It means that your children grow up as the only religious people on the island. I mean, who are their friends? Who do they play with? Well, they'll have siblings, but it's not the same as having a peer group. And so there's an interesting phenomenon about what happens to the children of these people. Many of them stay in Chabad and continue that work. The children of shluchim or the children of shluchim. But then you have a lot of drop-offs. You have a lot of kids who discover the outside world, go to college, and never come back. They believe it. Now there's different, you got to know that there's different kinds, right? So there are the Chabad guys that grew up in Chabad. And then there are Chabad guys that came to Chabad as Baal Shuvas in college. And they're very different characters. And then there's the Chabad guys that are second or third generation. Then there's a difference between the Chabad guys that are educated in Morristown and the Chabad guys that are educated in Crown Heights. Right? Different schools have different philosophies. All right, good morning. We put this on and we'll start. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. It is a closed cognitive system, which means it has an answer for every one of those questions, right? Now, you and I might say, that's silly, or that's wrong, or that's immoral. But they have an answer. So the women, they're going to say that women in that, it's any orthodoxy. Women are exalted. Women are worshipped, or not worshipped, but exalted.
She couldn't answer it, but, after studying it for 20 years, or whatever, however
No, it wasn't that long, but
she had to study.
she couldn't. She had but I didn't want to go too far because she's so sincere and so deeply faithful. Right. Look.
You were a law professor grilling a student. It's like, this is like...
morning. Shabbat Shalom. If you are a Golden State Warriors fan and you have not yet if you have not yet watched the game, put your hands over your ears, right? Those of you keeping it on. Did you tape it? You don't want me to say anything? Is he really? Can I give you a hint? Yeah, Yiskadal v'Yiskadash Shemei Rava. Lashana Haba. I just want you to know that we have put in a bid for LeBron. I'm willing to trade Phil and one of my rabbis for LeBron James. And if I can get Paul George as well, I'll trade away the Hebrew school. No, never mind. Anyway, it was an interesting. It was a bad game, actually. It wasn't a great game. What's great about it is to watch Stephen Curry. Stephen Curry is as close to ballet as you'll see on a basketball court. This man, first of all, and you don't realize how big he is, because when he stands next to the other players, he looks very small. He's 6'3". Kevin Durant's 7 foot tall, so you don't know how big he is. But to watch this man play basketball, there's a grace and a playfulness to this, which is just glorious to watch. And LeBron James, is in a different way. I mean, LeBron James is also amazingly agile and graceful. LeBron James reminds me of one of these giant airplanes that you see at the airport. You say, that'll never fly. I mean, a man that big plays a graceful game of basketball with real, it's just amazing. It's just, these are, if you like athletics, if you want to at its top level, this is what it was. So.
Insight into Stephen Curry.
Yeah. Does he really? Yeah. On 3-point shooting? What does he teach? As long as he stays out of Torah, I'm safe. You know. He goes into Torah, I go into basketball. You know. Then he's in trouble. You've never seen me play defense. That's the reason. And there's a reason. Anyway, welcome to everybody. It's great to see you. Shabbat Shalom. This is the time of year when everything at VBS sort of winds down. So. After shul, after learning, we have, there's actually 2 bar mitzvahs going on at the same time. The Playground Minions having a bar mitzvah for Miriam Herstein in the Sher Lapati Chapel, and there's another family having a bar mitzvah in the sanctuary. Lovely, lovely kid. And you're welcome to come and join us for prayers, and then afterwards there's enchiladas for lunch, and Torah group, Parasha group will meet after that. So if anybody wants to continue their learning this afternoon, they'll be available. And this week they have all the graduations. The Hebrew school had their graduation last week. The day school and nursery school have their graduation. If you have nothing to do Thursday morning and want to laugh and cry and sweet, the nursery school kids have their graduation. Which, yes, that's exactly right. First of all, it's an interesting thing. I think that there's an inverse proportion about the older you are, the farther you go in education, the more boring graduations become. Because in this one, everybody gets to dress up in sparkly outfits and sing and dance. In law school, they don't let you do that. But here, it's really very sweet. So if you want to see something glorious, come Thursday morning and join that graduation. It starts at 10, but if you want a parking place, come the night before.
Wait a minute. You graduate from Santa Cruz, right?
Yeah.
That graduation is always interesting.
I graduated from Santa Cruz, and it was interesting, right? It was an interesting grad. They played Layla, well, you would know, Layla was the graduation song, and it was a very interesting graduation. My graduation was interesting because I was one of the speakers. I got to be the principal graduation speaker, but there were some other people who gave speeches, and there were all these mighty socialist speeches about how, we glorify the working people who know the truth. They read all these wonderful socialist and liberation theology. And my father, who's a working guy, was sitting there going, no, that's why I sent you to college, Use your mind, It was a very funny graduation. Anyway, welcome. It's good to see everybody. Shabbat Shalom. So in case you're keeping score, this year the vacation schedule got turned upside down a little bit. So I'm going to be here through most of July. So we're going to have Torah study through the 3rd week in July. So the last week in July, which is July 28th, that's when we're going to stop. There'll be no Torah study. You can come and learn, by the way. If you want to just come and sit in this room, I'm sure Gelman will have something to say. I hope he's well. But from the last week, why? He's teaching tonight. He's over at Wilshire today. From the last week in July, which is July 28th, through August, we'll be off. Everybody take Shabbos, sleep in, and then we'll commence the first week in September. The first weekend in September is Labor Day, and Slichus is that Saturday night. So it's the first Saturday in September. Okay? Is that okay? So we're going to be on through July. You can come back. We're going to get to do a good chunk of the book of Deuteronomy, which is just great. And then we'll be off the last week in July through August, and we'll start again in September. But if you show up by accident, there's always shul and always enchiladas. Okay? Good. I'm going to South Africa. I got invited. I tell you this story, right? I got invited to go and teach Torah to the giraffes and hyenas and hippopotamuses or something. You know that giraffe is a kosher animal, by the way? If you could find someone to shecht one, you could eat it, you know. I don't know where you shecht the damn thing, but...
So where in South Africa?
I'm going to be in Johannesburg, Cape Town, Kruger National Park, and Durban. I'm teaching at a major internet... What's it called? Kruger. That's right, yeah. Kruger National Park, and then... Yeah, please.
Are you going to visit Rabbi Gershon in Uganda? Or?
No, I can't. So, but we've been sending a lot of letters. We have a letter that got to the Prime Minister, actually. Because if you've been following this drama, so you remember Rabbi Gershon. It's getting warm in here already. Did you? I can't believe this. I thought I had this set right. Shechianu v'kiyamanu. Rabbi Gershon Sizomo, who's been our guest many times, is the leader of the Aboyedaya tribe in Uganda, which is a group of 5 villages that belong to one large ethnic tribe that converted to Judaism. Well, they began practicing Judaism 100 years ago. In 1919, they started practicing Judaism. They converted 20 years ago with a group of conservative rabbis. And Rabbi Gershon Sizomo, who's the leader of the community, came here and studied at Ziegler. He worked at Shomrei Torah, spoke here many, many times. And as ordained rabbi, went back to live as a rabbi there. We've sent a lot of kids there, and families have visited there. One of the members of the community came to Israel this year and asked for aliyah. And the Ministry of Interior refused the guy aliyah. He said, you're not really Jewish. So there's a big worldwide protest, and there's a big court case now. Because the ministry, see, the rabbinate, there's 2 different authorities in Israel. The Ministry of the Interior decides if you can join the country, if you can immigrate, and you can immigrate if you're Jewish. And their definition of Jewishness has always been much more flexible and open than the rabbinate. The rabbinate, which deals with marriage law, has always been very, very strict. So the rabbinate will only accept conversions if they're done by 12 Orthodox rabbis in the world. The rabbinate in Israel will there's only 12 Orthodox rabbis in the world that the rabbinate in Israel will accept as legitimate conversion people.
By one of the 12.
Yeah, by 1 of the 12.
Not by 12.
No, you don't know. There's only, but, you know, so it's not only that they don't accept Reform rabbis, conservative rabbis, they don't accept any Chabad rabbis, they don't accept 90% of the Orthodox rabbis. There was a big thing about Ivanka, that Ivanka would not be considered Jewish by the chief rabbi, even though she was, what? Good. Even though she was converted by Rabbi Rachman of New York City, who's considered one of the great Orthodox rabbis in the world, but he ain't great enough for the rabbinate in Israel. So so anyway, this fellow was disallowed not by the rabbinate, but disallowed by the Ministry of the Interior, which shouldn't have happened. It's illegal. So there's a court case and a lot of protests, and we're working on that. That's where it is right now. It's like Israel needs more tsuras, right? Like one guy wants to come to Israel, and they're going to give him, yeah. On behalf of the congregation, from the leadership of the congregation. We said, this is wrong, this is illegal. And more than that, the real problem with it is, and I say this out, I mean, I love Israel, and I want Israel to be Israel. Israel has problems with race. They have a race problem, because when the Yemenites came, they did the same thing. And when the Ethiopians came, they did the same thing. And when the Bnei Yisrael from India came, they did the same thing. You can see a pattern here, right? You know, and so you don't have to, I mean, religiously you can disagree with them, but don't judge someone's Jewishness based on the color of their skin. And that's a serious problem. So This is like a pattern in Israeli culture. It takes a few tries for the Israeli the Israeli culture to accept people of color who are legitimate Jews. And these people were converted by a very distinguished group of conservative rabbis. Yeah, but conservative conversions accepted by the Ministry of Interior. So if you convert conservative, I convert you here, and you go to Israel and claim that you're a Jew, they'll accept you if you're white. That's the problem. That's the problem. That's what? Oh, no, she's accepted by the Ministry of Interior. That's okay. It's the Rabbanut, the rabbinate, that would not accept her. The rabbinate will not accept almost anybody. There's only 12 guys in the whole world they'll accept, right?
Is it race or culture?
It's race. Because Bnei Yisrael, the Indian Jews, they gave them a hard time. They're giving the Ethiopians a hard time. They gave the Yemenites a hard time. Those are all different. No, those are all different cultures. Yemenite Jews and Ethiopian Jews and Ugandan Jews live very different cultures. But there's one thing they have in common. One thing they have in common. Look, it'll get fixed because the Israeli Supreme Court is one of the truly great human rights organizations in the world. And the Israeli Supreme Court, is really sort of the conscience of the country, and they're going to take care of it. It'll go through, it'll get resolved. But it's just like, why do we need this? Like, why does the government need this? And why, with all of Israel's problems, and Israel has so many problems, and with all of the challenges to defend Israel in the world, why do you need this to stain Israel's image again and to make it difficult for those of us who love Israel to love Israel? You shouldn't. We have enough tsuris. I have a motto, like, never underestimate the self-destructive capacity of the Jewish people. Right? And this is, that's today's Torah portion, by the way, on page 840. Everybody have a chumash? No. You don't have a chumash? No chumashim? Oh, Doug, you want to do me a favor and go see if you can dig up a dozen chumashim or so? 12, 15, 20? Just find any maintenance person and say it's the Libra Roja. Libra Roja, right? Spanish? Libro Roja? Rojo. A Sefer HaAdam. Okay, if you don't have a chumash, I'll tell you the story while Doug's getting us some chumashim. I apologize for that. Page 840. We are in the middle of the book of Bamidbar. We are in a set of narratives which are defined by that name. The name of a book of the Bible, of course, is derived from the first significant word in the first line. Breshit is the first word of the book. That's what they called it, Breshit. The second book, Ve'elu Shemot B'nei Yisrael, the book is called Shemot. In English, we call it Exodus, because it's the Exodus from Egypt, but in Hebrew, it's Shemot, because it's the first big word. The third book of the Bible we call Leviticus in English. Sounds like Spartacus, right? But actually, it comes in Hebrew, it's Vayikra, God calls. The fourth book is Bamidbar, because it starts with this idea, Bamidbar Sinai. Bamidbar, it turns out, however, that the name of the book has an uncanny way of reflecting the content of the book, even though the title was obtained accidentally. Breshit, in the beginning, is the beginning. It's the beginning of everything, the beginning of the world, the beginning of humanity, the beginning of our people, the fundamental principles of our culture and faith. Shemot, which means names, because it starts with the list of the names of Jacob's kids who came into Egypt. Shemot is the book of our identity. Our identity is derived from these two moments in our history. Yetziat Mitzrayim, the Exodus from Egypt, and Mamad Har Sinai, standing at Mount Sinai, receiving God's covenant. So Shemot really is the name of the book. Vayikra, God calls. This is a book about calling. God's call to this people to live a holy life, the people's call on God. This mutual conversation we've been having with divinity, all of our history. And this book is called Bamidbar. Accidentally, it just says, takes place in the Midbar, in the wilderness of Sinai. But what it really is a guided tour through the wilderness of the human condition. Because everything that is lousy, everything that is dirty, everything that is low, everything that is debased, everything that is broken about human beings, this book's going to show it to you. This is the book you don't want your neighbors reading. This is, if you ever, Jews don't air their dirty laundry in public. Oh, yes, they do. No one there?
Can't find a maintenance dude.
All right, we'll try. Go to the kitchen, but never mind. We'll
To the kitchen.
They're not there?
No.
No? All right, we'll just share books. I'll do the best we can. This is a book. So last week when we start the journey from Sinai to Canaan, you imagine the journey is going to be carried out in an exalted way. And instead, the first thing that happens on the journey, instead of a people elevated by their experience of divinity, what do they want? Hamburgers, chops, steaks, ribs. I mean, Moses says to the people, I give you justice, an image of the just society. I give you a spiritual experience. You meet God. I give you the answer to the fundamental human condition. How to live a life that breathes with immortality. And the people say, yeah, all that's great. Hamburgers. Bring us burgers. And Moses Moses gives up. Moses says, Moses literally, last week you were here, Moses literally, you were in the desert with me too. Moses literally says to God, kill me here. Kill me here. I can't deal with this anymore. I bring them out of Egypt, out of slavery, out of genocide. I bring them to Sinai. I introduce them to God. I give them everything, every truth that human beings desire in the world. And what do they want? Ribs. Ribs. Tony Roma, ribs. Tony Roma's not Jewish. Did anybody know that? Yeah, he's closed, right? You see? I mean, and Moses just says, ugh, and you. So one of the questions you got to ask yourself as you're reading, this chapter is going to get, by the way, worse. Next chapter is even worse, and the one after that's even worse. Each one of these parshiot, you got to ask yourself, why is it here? Why is it here? Who put this in the Torah? Why are we airing our dirty? Why are we showing this? Why are we dwelling on this? Why not something exalted? Why not something exalted? I told you once, I had this wonderful experience when I was a graduate student at Columbia. I was in an international philosophy of education seminar. People from all around the world. There's two of us who were Americans. I was the only Jew in the room. Two Japanese professors, a Korean professor, a Nigerian Catholic priest, a French existentialist, smoked these horrible cigarettes. And they brought in, to meet us in this group, they brought in this guy who was this famous scholar of religion. He was a man from China who had been born in the Buddhist tradition, raised in the Buddhist tradition, left the Buddhist tradition, became a Christian, earned a PhD somewhere, exalted, and he knew every world religion, and he comes and he speaks to us. This is absolutely gentle, sweet man. And he says, I look at the images of religion. He says, what's the image of Buddhism, the faith that I was raised in? The Buddha sits beneath the Bodhi tree for 7 years, and he achieves nirvana. He figures out truth, and he walks the world, like an inch off the earth. Like Buddha is calm. Oh, he's only laughing, because he's calm. You ever see the Dalai Lama? The Dalai Lama, he's like calm. You ever see the Dalai Lama? He laughs so easily. The guy's got real Surasepis, but Tibetan Buddhism teaches him to step away from the edge. Then this guy, and he talks about each of the faiths of the world, the Christ image of a man, a perfect man, God who walks the world. And he says, and he looks at me, and he sees me sitting there with my kippah, and he says, you, I don't understand. He said, and in his beautiful, sweet accent, he says, Asian accent, he said, I try to understand Jewish tradition. I don't get it. He says, what is your image? We have Buddha, quiet, calm, centered, happy. You, Moses, come down mountain, screaming, yelling, fighting, everything. What is with you Jews, right? Right. Then he says, then I open your Talmud, I said, oh no. He said, what do I read in the Christian New Testament? Blessed are the meek, they shall inherit the earth. What do I read in the Buddhist scriptures, about disengaging? It's a disengagement from the conflicts of the world to find the center of peace within. Then I open your Talmud. What do I read? Two guys walk into court with one shirt. This one say, in mine. This guy's like, in mine! He's this beautiful Asian accent. He's acting out Mishnah. It's Mishnah Bava Metzia 1. He says, screaming, yelling, fighting, all you Jews about conflict, you know? So then the whole class turns to me, he's like, tell him, you know, like. But then he's right. He's right. Conflict. I mean, ask yourself this question. If this is supposed to be a book which guides us to peace, how come there's so much conflict in it? I mean, think about this for a minute. Don't you think about this for a minute? Now, you could say, because the Jewish tradition is realistic about what the human being is about. Because if you're going to bring peace to the world, you need to understand the human material out of which you're going to create peace. Because Judaism never conceived of itself as an escape from the world of reality. It thought of itself as a correction to the world of reality. Because Jews don't escape earth to go to heaven. We try to find a way to bring heaven into the earth. And if you're going to bring heaven on earth, you're going to have to do it out of this people. These are the people you're working with. I mean, you can say all of that, right? Right? And that was my answer to him. I said, because people do walk the world grabbing. How are you going to turn them into saints? He said, oh, interesting question. You know, how do you turn those people into saints? It's easy to turn saintly people saintly, right? If you know, they're easy. You got to turn selfish people saintly. You got to turn acquisitive people safe. You got to turn fearful people. This is a Torah portion about fear. How do you turn fearful people saintly? That's the great question. So here's the story. Let me just give you the quick story, then I'll answer Michael's question. We're on page 840. If you don't have it, I'm going to read it. It's okay. The Lord spoke to Moses. So just before we get here, if you looked at the very end, what happens is we arrive. 2 years, 2 months out of Egypt, we made it. We're here. We're here. We got there. We arrived. We're at the boundaries of Eretz Canaan. We arrive at the boundaries of Eretz Canaan. We're here. What's going to happen next? The Lord spoke to Moses saying, send men to scout the land of Canaan. Send men to scout the land of Canaan, which I'm giving to the Israelite people. Send one man from each ancestral tribe, each a chieftain. I don't want schleppers. I want presidents. Right? I want shul presidents to go. I want every one of them, right? So Moses, by the Lord's command, sent them out from the wilderness of Paran, all the men being leaders, and it gives us all of their names. Right? All the names. Verse 17 on 841. When Moses sent them to scout the land of Canaan, he said to them, go up into the Negev, into the hill country, see what kind of country it is. Are the people who dwell in it strong or weak, few or many? Is the country in which they dwell good or bad? Are the towns they live in open or fortified? Is the soil rich or poor? Is it wooded or not? Take pains to bring back the fruit of the land. It happened to be the season of grapes. I don't know what's the season of grapes. Anyway, it's the season of grapes. Fall? You think so? So they went up and they scouted the land from Zin to Rehob to Lochamat. And they went up to the Negev, and they came to Hebron. And Hebron was founded. It gives you a little bit of a little travel guide to Hebron, right? And they reach Wadi Eshkol, and they cut down a branch with a single cluster of grapes. It had to be borne on a carrying frame by the two of them, and some pomegranates and figs. You ever buy Carmel wine? You ever see the emblem on Carmel wine? It happens to also be the same emblem as the Israeli Ministry of Tourism. Yes. It's two guys carrying one bunch of grapes, and the grapes are the size of basketballs. Right? That's the emblem of Carmel wine. It's also the Israeli Ministry of Tourism. All right, that's the mission. Michael, come on in. Come on in.
All right, I'm going to say is that the problem with the Jesus character, the Christ character, the Buddha is in literature we need someone with whom we can identify. So I try to identify with the ideal. The absolute ideal is almost impossible by those of us who read these things.
Okay, so Michael's point is that you have in these literatures an image of a spiritual ideal. The Buddha, the Christ. Muhammad didn't set himself up that way, but there are saints in Islam as well. And the moral problem is it's very hard to identify with the ideal, right? Because you can't approach it. I mean, it's in the New Testament. That's the problem.
And
Every time Jesus expects something of his guys, they disappoint him, right? In the Buddha, it's how do you schlep people to that place of Buddha consciousness?
Therefore, it creates failure in terms of those who are that try to achieve that kind of idealistic life.
All right, so it creates a sort of sense of failure and futility, and so you get the sense of why try.
Yeah, I read this.
Right.
And I say, this is me. I can get beyond it. I may not get perfect.
All right, so this is a different strategy. So this is a strategy which is brutally realistic about who human beings are. And it says to you, is there a way out of this? Is there a way beyond this? Can I elevate, if I can elevate this character, right, I can be elevated as well. So what I want to do today, by the way, as we read, in the Jewish tradition, there are considered 4 ways of reading Torah. And the acronym for this is the word pardes, which means the paradise or the orchard, actually. So it's Pshat, Drash, Remos, Sod. Pshat means the text. What do the texts tell us? What's the story? Drash is, what's the moral of the story? What's the moral of the story? Remos is internalized. How is this a story about my internal life? And Sod is, how is this a story about the universe? So let's see if we can find some of these. Pshat, Drash, Remos, Sod, right? In this story, because the narrative is so compelling, it demands that we read it on many levels at the same time. Okay? We arrive at Eretz Canaan. Pshat. Moses picks 12 guys to reconnoiter the land. Pshat. Why would you do that? Why do you need to reconnoiter the land? What is he expecting them to come back and say? Anyone here a trial attorney? There's a famous rule for trial attorneys. You don't ask a witness a question unless you know exactly what he or she is going to answer. You don't send 12 spies into the land unless you know what you're going to answer. What was Moses expecting them to come back and say? It's the land of milk and honey. We've made it. God's promise is fulfilled. Let's go take it. I'm retiring back to Midian. Moses had already applied for Medicare. He had bought a ticket on a big cruise ship leaving from Midian. He was ready to retire. He was ready to retire. This is it. 2 years. I got him out of Egypt. God told me to get him out of Egypt. Got him out of Egypt. Get him across I got him across the desert. Get him to Canaan. Get him into Canaan. I'm done. I'm out of here. I go back to, thank God, sheep. Sheep. Right? I have friends. All of the guys in my class. I'm the only guy in my class still working. In my rabbi class. Right? All the guys in my class retired this year and last year. I can't afford it. I got kids in school. But like I said, what are you going to do with your time? So one guy says, I'm going to raise sheep. I say, why? He says, after Jews, sheep are easy. You say, go right, they go right. You say, left, go left. They're machaya. It's like sheep. I say, you're going to be bored. He says, yeah, and I can't wait. One guy's going to take one of those cruise ships around the world. He's the rabbi on the cruise ship going around the world. Yeah, I thought of that too. Yeah, Yontif comes. He's in God knows where, right? This is Moses' plan, right? And so he picks the 12 guys. They go into the land, right? It's going to work, right? Right? Now, just for a moment, I want you to skip one. I want you to go to Remos, which is internal truth. When in your life have you ever been facing the thing you wanted most in life? When in your life have you ever been facing the dream you were pursuing? Like, it's in your reach. You can have it. The thing you wanted most, the thing you dreamed about, the thing you were working for. And there it is. The Emerald City. Right? Right? Isn't it interesting, by the way, that Dorothy, after all that, wanted to leave the Emerald City, go back to Kansas? Right? You're standing, there it is. What happens to people when they actually reach the end of their dreams? What happens? That's what this story is about, you see? So you got to read this story on many levels.
Well, I think my answer to this question is ambivalence. They doubt their decision.
Yeah, why? Why do you have ambivalence? Everything you've been trying for, it's right there. Why do you have ambivalence? What's the ambivalence of reaching the end of your dreams? Well, first of all, it's never, or it might not be what you expected it to be. What if it disappoints me? What if it wasn't worthy of all the struggle that I went to get here? Yeah, yeah. Was it worthy of me? Right? I mean, it raises a really interesting human problem. And this, is it better to get what you want or better to aspire but never reach it? Remember, Moses is never going to get into the land. Who in the end is more successful or more happy or happier or satisfied with his life? The guy who actually gets what he wanted or the guy who never gets it but spends his life striving and aspiring? Just consider this for a minute. Douglas, yes?
I went to law school in Chicago.
Mazel tov.
And, you know,
Do they have law in Chicago? I just...
when the Cubs were there, they used to have signs, anybody could have a bad century. I always wondered whether winning would make the Cubs just another team and change the passion of a Cubs fan from being, the team that we love them because of what, who they are. Once they win, they're just like everybody else.
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a wonderful question.
I mean, they had to answer that. I mean, the Red Sox had to do that with the curse of Babe Ruth about it, the Bambino.
Yeah.
A decade and a
Yeah.
half ago.
Yeah.
It's like, do they just become another team?
Yeah. On my Facebook page now is all the pictures of the kids graduating. So the kid graduating elementary school or middle school or high school or college or graduate school, and mazel tov, that's wonderful. I mean, graduations are ambivalent moments, right? Aren't they? It's like you've been waiting for this, and it's finally here, and you get to dress in the cap and gown, and and you get the awards, and you have the party, and then it's like,
What now?
oh yeah, right, yeah, like it's really an interesting question. Moments of culmination. So what happens to this people? We're going to get to this.
Whenever we get what we want something different.
Yeah, isn't that interesting? Why is that?
It's just human nature.
Is it human? That's what human beings are about. Yeah, Marcia.
Many years ago, my oldest daughter told me what philosophy of life was,
Yeah,
and I didn't know what the word meant.
yeah.
And she said, life is an endless search for a reason to live.
Life is an endless search for a reason to live. All right, that's an interesting. Well, we'll get, yeah, Pop.
There are two things here. That it was a land of milk and honey.
Yeah.
That was agreed upon.
Yeah.
But it was heavily armed.
Well, we're going to get to that. So let's take a look. At page 843. At the end of 40 days is sort of the Jewish way of saying a long time. They returned from scouting the land. They went straight to Moses and Aaron and the whole Israelite community at Kadesh in the wilderness of Paran. And they made their report to them and the whole community, and they showed them the fruit of the land. And this is what they said: we came to the land you sent us to. It does indeed flow with milk and honey. So far, so good. And this is the fruit. You're in the desert, by the way, and somebody brings fresh fruit. It's like, ooh. Right? However, oy vey. Where's however in Hebrew? Right? However, Ephes. However, the people who inhabit the country are powerful. The cities are fortified and very large. Moreover, we saw the Anakites there. We'll talk about that and who they are. Anakites dwelled in the Negev region, Hittites and Jebusites. Who are the Anakites? The Hebrew word Anak means giants. Anakites are a mythical race of giants. The mythical race of giants. The Titans live there. The people who live in this land are giants, right? The giants, right? Now, Caleb, who is the representative of the tribe of Judah, Caleb hushed the people before Moses and said, let us by all means go up. We shall gain possession of it, for we shall surely overcome it. He didn't deny their report, right? So everyone agrees it's a land that's beautiful. The question is it obtainable? Is it obtainable? That's the question. Now, implied in that is an interesting fact which we didn't consider before. How did they defeat Pharaoh? Did they rise up and fight against Pharaoh? What did they do? They put blood on their lintels and watched God produce his magic, right? How did they get the Torah? Did they do anything to earn it? No. They purified themselves 3 days and stood at Mount Sinai, and God dropped it on them. Right? How have they crossed the desert? What are they eating? Manna. They have to get food for themselves? No, every morning it's provided. What are they drinking? Magic well water. Wherever Miriam went, there was a well, right? Have they done anything? Have they done, except for putting blood on the lintel, have they done anything in this process?
Sort of like a teenager.
Sort of what?
Sort of like a teenager.
Well, sort of like a child, yeah. Now, they are arriving at the borders of the land, and he sends them in, and he asks them two different kinds of questions. Go back with me for a second. He asks them, what kind of land is it? Is it beautiful? Is it fruitful? Then he asks them a different question. Are the people who dwell in it strong or weak, few or many? Right? Do they live in towns open or fortified? Now, why would you want to know if the people are strong or weak or if the towns are fortified? That's a different level of question. What does that imply? Conquest. War. He's sending them to reconnoiter a battle. But if they're going to have to do battle, this is the first thing they're going to actually have to do. It's the first thing they're going to actually have to do to take responsibility for their own redemption. Part of what their hesitancy is, we haven't been asked to do anything up to now. And now we're going to have to do what? We're going to have to fight? Are we ready for this? And the people who live there, they look mighty to us. They look mighty to us. Ready? Moses, where are we now? We are, let us go up and take it. Why does Caleb say, let us go up and take it? Because he saw what happened to Egypt. Because there's nobody more powerful than the Pharaoh. And there's nothing in this land that we can't do if we've done what we've done before. But the men who had gone up with him said, we can't attack that people. They're stronger than we are. How do they know? Thus they spread calumnies. What are calumnies? Insults. Yeah, bad reports, right? Fake news, to quote a great American, among the Israelites about the land that they had scouted, saying, now listen carefully, the country that we traversed and scouted is one that devours its settlers. Eretz ochelet yoshvecha. Well, that may be true, right? It's before they told us it was a good and fruitful land. Now what are they saying? There's something dangerous about this place, right? All the people, what? That's in 40 days, 40 days. They took Eged tours. All the people they saw, all the people that we saw in it are men of great size. We saw Nephilim and Anakites, which are part of Nephilim. And here's the line, page 844. We looked like grasshoppers to ourselves, and so we must have looked to them. We looked like bugs to ourselves. When we compared ourselves to them, we felt like bugs. Now that's true. That's how they felt. But then they add one more little idea. That's what we must have looked to them. What do you call that? Must have looked to them. Anybody here have a 13-year-old living at home? Kid stares into the mirror hour after hour saying, oh my God, he's going to think I'm ugly. Something called, we call it self-consciousness, but it's actually a very sophisticated cognitive psychological move. It's when I put myself into the mind of the other and look back at myself, right? Look back at myself. He's going to think that I'm ugly. That's every 13-year-old. That's why 13-year-olds spend hours in front of mirrors primping, because they're worried about, they suddenly have this new cognitive ability to imagine what the other sees when he sees me, when she sees me. And the other sees me as small. Now what is it? It's called projection in psychology. It's when I imagine how you're thinking about me. Right? I imagine how you're thinking about me. You ever walk into a cocktail party where you know nobody? And your first, anyone ever walk into a cocktail party with nobody, and you have this shiver of fear, like, I don't belong here, they're going to think I'm a stranger, they're going to, you ever have that moment? Right? Right? The only one who doesn't have that moment is my baby's son, who has like the world's greatest social energy. He walks into a cocktail party and he's everybody's best friend. I don't know where he got this from. It ain't from me and my wife, right? But there are people like that. But most of us walk into a room of strangers and say, I wonder how I look to them. And you imagine the worst. You always imagine the worst, right? Now, what happens when you imagine the worst? You run away. You're going to run away from this. You're going to blanch from this. You're not going to engage because I'm afraid that if I engage, I'm going to confirm their worst impressions of me. So you step back. And you step back. I tell kids going off to college this time of year, every kid in the college is a stranger. No one's more stranger. No one's stranger than you are, right? So sitting with them, they all want to be your best friend. And the reason they look so severe sitting at the lunch table is because they're afraid that you're going to think badly of them. So walk up and say hello, and you'll see a look of utter relief on their face. You have to learn how to do this. It's a very difficult thing to do. It's called projection. Now, this image, he looked like a bug to me. Anybody remember Franz Kafka's story Metamorphosis? Right, so Franz Kafka, the great Jewish Czech writer, early 20th century, he has a story called Metamorphosis, and the first line, remember the first line? Gregor Samsa woke up one morning and discovered that he'd been turned into a giant cockroach. And he's lying on his back in his bed with his little legs waving in the air with his domed belly, and he discovers that he's a cockroach. He discovers that he's a cockroach. He's a bug, right? And then Kafka begins describing how his family treats him and how the world treats him and how Gregor Samsa's been living all this time. And as you read the story, what do you discover? He was always a cockroach. He always thought of himself as a bug. He never stepped outside of the exoskeleton of the lines drawn for him by the culture. He was purely conventional and never thought an original thought, never did an original thing, never entered into an original relationship. He lived within the boundaries that the culture set for him. He had always been an insect. He just didn't know it. But one morning, that's how he woke up. These people enter the land, and suddenly they think of themselves in very different terms. We're bugs. And if we're bugs, what do we need to do? Crawl under the baseboard and hide. Crawl under the baseboard and hide. But that's only 10 of the guys. 2 of the guys still have a sense of who they really are. The community broke into loud cries, and the people wept all night, right? And all the Israelites railed against Moses and Aaron. Okay, go down a little bit. Go down to verse 6. Everybody see verse 6? Joshua, son of Nun, and Caleb, son of Yefuneh, who had scouted the land, rent their clothes and exhorted the community. The land that we traverse is exceedingly good land. If the Lord is pleased with us, he will bring us to this land, a land that flows with milk and honey, and give it to us. Only you must not rebel against the Lord. Have no fear then of the people of the country, for they are our prey. The Hebrew is so much better. So I keep telling you to learn Hebrew, please. Right? Ach ba'Adonai al timredu. Don't rebel against God. Don't reject this gift. Don't reject this dream. Ve'atem al tiru. Don't be afraid. Et ha'am ha'aretz. Don't be afraid of this, the people of the land. Look at the first 3 words in the Hebrew on page 846. Ki lachmenuhem. Lachmenuhem. Lechem. They're toast. Literally, they're toast. We'll eat them for breakfast. Lechem. They're our bread. We'll eat these guys for breakfast. Are you kidding? We smashed the Pharaoh. We smashed the Amalekites in the desert. Are you kidding me? You're afraid of these guys? Right? But because their protection is departed for them. Right? The Lord is with us. Have no fear. But the whole community threatened to pelt them with stones. All right, so what did Joshua and Caleb know or see that the other 10 didn't know or see? Please, Bruce.
There's not a disagreement over the facts of the situation.
Right.
There's a disagreement over the interpretation of those facts.
Okay, spell it out.
And what we're capable of doing. The thing that this reminds me of is Jacob, when he wrestles with the angel.
Okay.
Jacob's made all of those preparations for what's going to happen when he meets with Esau.
Right.
And then he goes to bed, and there's an angel there wrestling with him.
Right.
And his reaction is, they wrestle until
Okay.
He turns adversity into a blessing.
All right, so let me just,
Go ahead.
Jacob, I get yelled at if I don't repeat questions. Jake, because there's people watching. You're immortal now, you know. Jacob, it reminds Bruce of Jacob, because he makes all these preparations out of fear of his brother. He's terrified of meeting his brother in the morning, Esau, right? So he makes all the preparations, and he goes to sleep, and either in a dream or in a moment, an angel comes and wrestles with him. And he's beating the guy. In the morning, he's actually beating the guy. And he says to the guy, I'm not going to let you go until you give me a blessing. Go ahead.
So the point is he's turned adversity into a blessing.
Yeah.
In that context. And here we have a disagreement.
Here you turn blessing into adversity.
We don't have yeah, that's right. We don't have a disagreement over the facts of the situation. Everyone agrees it's a great place. It's filled with tough people. And the question is, what are we going to do about it?
Everyone agrees that it's a great place and it's something we wanted and aspired to. The question is, can it be ours? Can it be ours? Right? What did the 10 see and what did the 2 see? The 10 saw settled people. Coming out of the desert, seeing settled people scared the hell out of them. Right? They saw people, they saw giants. They saw people that were greater and more mighty than themselves. Right? The 2, do they see the same thing? Yeah, they see the same thing. But they calculate a different kind of risk because they remember the history of this people and the capacity of their God to deliver them from Egypt, to destroy all the obstacles in the desert. So on one level, if you're talking about the drash level, which is shot drash, right? Shot's the narrative. Drash is the moral. The religious moral reasoning, they have no faith. They have no faith in God. They have no faith in themselves. They have no faith in God. They have no faith in themselves. Their dominant narrative is the narrative of slavery. Having been a slave is a bug. It's literally a grasshopper, a bug. Having been a slave, they're not ready to think outside of the boundaries of their exoskeleton. The skeleton that a bug wears, right? They're not willing to get out of that and be a butterfly yet. They're not willing to imagine themselves as conquerors. They're not prepared to imagine themselves as actually achieving the dream that they've been struggling for. They're afraid of it, so they set up their own psychological obstacles so they don't have to confront it.
And these are the leaders.
They don't have to confront it because they're just terrified. And these are the leaders. These are the leaders. And the people turn against Moses and Aaron, and they want to kill them. And they want to kill. If you look back for just a moment, look at the section that we skipped. They said a very interesting thing. 845, top of the page. If only we had died in the land of Egypt, the whole community shouted at them. Or if only we might die in this wilderness. Why is the Lord taking us to that land to fall by the sword? Our wives and children will be carried off. It would be better for us to go back to Egypt. Now, wait a minute. If only that we had died in Egypt, if only we died in the wilderness, why are you bringing us to the land? If it's only we died, what difference does it make if you go in the land and die there? So the thing they're most afraid of, there's something there which they're terrified of. They're terrified of confronting their own inadequacies. Right? They will be defeated. That's what they're terrified by. Will be destroyed. It's confronting your own smallness that terrifies them. If only we had died, and then let's go back to Egypt, which is that constant refrain. Let's go back to Egypt. What's in Egypt? Safety, security. It may be miserable, but it's a misery we know. Freedom offers no guarantees. It's such an interest. Do you get the psychology of this thing? It is such an interest. That's Remos. That's the third level. Pshat is the narrative. Drash is the religious idea. You lost faith. Remos is, what happens when I face that which I most want out of life, but I'm afraid to take it? What I do is I set up a psychological barrier for myself so they don't have to take it. Because if I take it, I might discover that it's not worthy of me. Because if I take it, I might, so I start defining myself as unworthy of that which I wanted. Of unworthy of that which I wanted. Yes, please.
The question is, what did Caleb and Joshua see that the other two people didn't see?
Right, right.
Sometimes you got to take it a little step further. You see people who build fortresses and stuff like that. That means that we're going to conquer.
That's a wonderful observation. It's a wonderful observation. So just listen for just a moment, because this is a wonderful observation. Who's stronger? The people who live in walled cities or the people who live in unwalled cities? Why? Right. The reason you build walls is because you're afraid. If you can live without walls, it means you're not afraid. I'm not being political here. You build walls because you're terrified of something that's bigger than you. Right? Remember, there's this wonderful scene in King Kong when they come to the village on the island and they see this enormous wall. And they say, these people are afraid of something really big. The bigger the wall, the bigger your fear. People who live in unwalled cities aren't afraid of nothing. And as a matter of fact, now watch this. Put a finger here and come with me to the Haftorah. The Haftorah is the prophetic section chosen by the rabbis to accompany this Torah portion. It's the story of Joshua at the battle of, you know the song, right? What happens is, look at the Haftorah. We're on page 857 for a moment. Don't lose where we are in the Torah, but come to Joshua. 40 years later, Joshua, son of Nun, Joshua, who was one of the two spies who got it right, becomes the commander, the leader of the people. He sent spies. How many spies? 2. He learned his lesson. You don't send 12 guys, right? That's why Jews love committees, you know? Committees always get us into trouble, right? I said, that's the moral of the story. Good night and thank you, right? A committee will always get you into trouble. Send 2, right? He sends 2 spies. Go reconnoiter the region of Jericho. So they go into the land, and they take refuge with a woman named Rahab. Rahab, she is what's called a zonah, which they translate here as harlot. That's wrong. The word zonah, I mean, it could be that she is she's a zonah, a lady of the night, as it were. But more likely, she's an innkeeper. Now, that's where you would meet ladies of the night, of course. But from the word mazon, she had she had a hostel, an innkeep, an inn, a motel with a coffee shop, right? A place, Howard Johnson's. Remember Howard Johnson's? Oliver Shalom, right? You know, a place on the road where you could stop for the night and get something to eat and a bed to rest in. And I suppose if you wanted to buy a woman, you could do that too. But and she lives on the outer wall so that travelers can come to her, right? And the king of Jericho is told, the king has an intelligence that the Israelites are sending spies into the city. So the king says to Rahab, produce the spies, right? Right? And she deflects the king's request, right? And hides the guys on the roof. Okay? And the spies, look at verse 8. The spies had not yet gone to sleep, and she said, so she comes up to the roof to meet these guys, right? And she said to them, I know that the Lord has given the country to you. She's a Canaanite. She's one of those people the 12 guys are afraid of. And she says to the spies, we know what's coming, right? I know the Lord, because the dread of you has fallen on us. And all the inhabitants of the land are quaking before you. For we have heard how the Lord dried the waters of the Red Sea for you, and when you left Egypt, and what you did to Sihon and Og, the 2 Amorite kings across the Jordan, whom you doomed. And when we heard about it, we lost heart, and no man has any spirit left because of you, for the Lord your God is the only God in heaven. And they make her into a frum lady, right? What is she telling them? The 12 spies went into the land. They see the cities. They see the people. They come back. 10 of them say, the people of that land are giants. We can never take them. We felt like bugs. That's how we must have looked to them. What don't they know that we just found out? The people of the land are looking across the Jordan River, and what do they see? 2.5 million Israelites marching in formation. Israelites who have been slaves for 400 years, ready to take back their homeland. What are the people of the land feeling? Utter, sheer terror. Yeah, hang on, Pop. Utter sheer terror. That's what the spies didn't know. That the people of the land feared them more than they feared the people of the land. The whole thing was their own psychological projection. Their fear of taking the land was their own insecurity. They could have had the land. But instead, what does God decree? This generation can't take the land. They're not ready. They're still slaves in their heads, and they'll never take the land. So Moses is told to turn them around, take them back into the wilderness, where they're going to spend 38 years, a generation, until the children will be ready to take the land. And the children will be the ones who take the land. And the only 3 people who are going to survive those 40 years are Moses, Joshua, and Caleb. And the Midrash has a really scary thing. The Midrash says that every Tisha B'Av, everybody dug his own grave and lied down in his grave, right? And every year, 1/40 of the people, didn't get up. And that's how every year, 1/40 of that generation died off, until at the end there was a brand new generation of children ready to take the land. What did the children know that their parents didn't? No, the parents know slavery. What did the children know? They grew up in the desert. Self-reliance, freedom, the dream unencumbered by all the insecurities. They could have the dream. They're ready for the dream. Sometimes parents who have to struggle for this aren't ready for the dream that their children get to enjoy. And that becomes the metaphor, right? Maybe your job in life isn't to take the dream. Maybe it's to set your children up that they can have the dream. And that becomes a sort of motto of Jewish parenthood, doesn't it? How many of our parents suffered and sacrificed for us because they wanted us to have the dream? And that was their dream, is that we would get the dream. All right, now you're up. I got it? Good. Thank you. That was nice. Yes, please.
Why did they need to conquer the land if they were able to go and live with them?
That's a great question. No, stop. That's a beautiful question. Don't stop. Don't stop. Don't go so. No, I know. But that question was good. Why would you want to go fast? Why do they need to conquer the land? Why didn't God just give it to them? Why didn't God just go and all the Canaanites disappear? Why did? Wait, stop. Come on, it's such a good question. Why did they have to conquer the land? Why did you tell your children they had to dump the trash, mow the lawn, make their beds? Go the other way. What happens to children who've never made their beds? I worry about this because every kid in our school has a Latin live-in maid who makes his bed and dumps his trash and cleans his tushy. What happens to children who have never made their own beds, who have never mowed their own lawn, who have never put the dishes in the dishwasher, what happens to those people? What happens to, I'm worried this is a serious issue. Stop that. I try so hard to keep a zone that's free of politics, and I keep getting, you get something called the poverty of affluence, which is a flaw in the character of a child who doesn't understand that my behavior has consequences, that life is about making choices, that life is a struggle, that there are struggles, and that sometimes I fail in my struggles, and I have to learn how to pick myself up after those failures and continue, because there are things in life worth the struggle. I mean, there's a lot of things that go along with this.
And how good you feel when you have...
So God took us out of Egypt by smashing the Pharaoh. All we had to do was watch. The only thing we had to do is put a little blood over the lintel, which we talked about is not a small thing, but that was the only act of responsibility. Then you get out in the desert and you have this beautiful... I saw it last week when Moses says to God, what am I, a nursemaid? God's feeding them, God's clothing them, God's leading them, God's protecting them. They're walking across the desert with a pillar of fire. Like What a great metaphor, right? Pillar of fire. Like, you never have to decide what to do. You never have to worry about a thing. You ever wonder, like, oh, can we do this? Pillar. And these are the people, by the way, who said we can't have the land. The pillar of fire people. I mean, just think. So, you're not getting this. Why do they have to be the ones to conquer the land? Because if God settles them in the land automatically, what kind of people will they be? What kind of society will they create? What kind of morals will they hold? Right? At some point, I am so assiduously I want to get credit for this. Right? I am assiduously avoiding getting schlepped into your political points of view. Right? Right? It's a very serious question. Jump with me from your pshat to drash to Remos. Why do they have to conquer the land? Why do they have to take part in the conquest of the? God will help them, no question. Why do they have to take part in the conquest of the land? Because because to obtain everything, to obtain the dream, without lifting a finger, will what?
Create character.
Elaborate. Create character in what way?
They have the ability to know that you're doing the right thing.
Right.
And being able to lead other people to do the same thing.
To know that I'm doing the right thing, to lead people to do the right thing, to make sacrifices, to sacrifice something precious to me, to engage in the fight to gain something. It's a different kind of, right? It's a different mentality when you have to fight for it. To feel responsible, to feel engaged, to feel empowered, to not be a child your whole life. The problem with the kid who never makes his bed is he's never going to grow up. He's going to look for a mate in life who's going to be his mommy, not his partner. There's something about the development of human personality. So the question is a brilliant question. Moses and God, they know exactly what they're doing, and the people aren't ready for it. That's the point of this Torah portion. They're not ready to stop being children, but their children will be, because growing up in the desert will teach them something that their parents don't know yet.
But how did they know that they have to do it by themselves? They didn't think about it, that they have been helped by God.
Yeah.
So this time, when they go in there,
Yeah.
they're going to conquer it easily because God is going to help them.
Well, so one level you say they don't have faith in God. That's the sort of traditional answer. But I think there's something much deeper here. I think there's that Remos level, which says, what happens when I'm presented with the thing I want most in life, and it's given to me, instead of my having to earn it and deserve it? What kind of person do I become? What do I think of that achievement? Right? It's like all the kids get participation trophies now. No one's in first place, last place. I mean, it's a couple of years ago, there was this lovely guy, in Massachusetts who gave the graduation address. Remember, there was an English teacher at a high school, gave a graduation address in Massachusetts at a high school. And it was, he just says, and it was called, "You're Not That Special." And he says, the problem with you guys is you've been told since the day you were born, you're absolutely extraordinary and special. You've never had to do anything to earn it. Well, let me tell you something. That ain't the world. And you're not that special. You're not that. I mean, it was a very interesting observation about how we raise our children. We want to protect them from defeat and from the blow to their self-esteem that comes with defeat. But if you protect a kid from defeat, always, the kid never knows what it means to risk something big in order to achieve something big. I was a school principal before I became a synagogue rabbi. And we had a big fight on our school board. For the first 4 years, I was 8 years in the school. For the first 4 years, we decided not to have competitive sports. Because this was a big thing, because they didn't want the kids to feel they're losers. And then we began to say, but if you don't have competitive sports, you don't understand how to be a good loser and how to be a good winner. You don't understand sportsmanship. Just incidentally, by the way, there's a wonderful moment last night. When LeBron James left the game, there was about 5-6 minutes left in the game, and it was lost, so they pulled him out. He stopped on the court and shook hands with all the opposing players. He gave fist bumps to Kevin Durant and Steph Curry and Klay Thompson. there was a moment where you saw that these guys are ferocious competitors. But there's also a thing called sportsmanship. And you don't understand what it is you don't understand how to overcome defeat. I mean, there's just interesting things you learn from sport. It's an interesting human endeavor. So this is what we're talking about here, right? Yes.
The people that were living there, were they deserving of being conquered?
Oh, now you're feeling sorry for the Canaanites? Is that... Oh, now you're going to get me into other politics here. We couldn't have had a two-state solution, the Israelites and the Canaanites. It's a wonderful question. The question is, did the people who live there deserve to be conquered? All right, so the Torah says yes, that they were evil, that they stained the land with their idolatry and evil, and they deserve to be conquered. That's number one. Number two, that this was the land promised to Abraham long before they got there, right? And then but you see, here's going to be the interesting thing, and you raise a really interesting question. Watch. The commandment is go into the land and conquer them and take the land, right? When you read the book of Joshua, the book of Joshua is the narrative of how they went into the land and conquered the land, right? And slaughtered the people who lived there, and took over the cities, and took over the farms, and took over the land. And at the end of the book of Joshua, you have a sense that the land is completely empty of people, and we walked into it. Then you turn the page, right? And the next book is called Judges, Shoftim. And the book of Judges starts describing how the Israelites lived in and among all the other nations of the land. Canaanites, Midianites, Amorites, Edomites, Moabites, they all lived there. So the two different theories of this. One, which is sort of a genocidal conquest of the land, and we took it over. And the other, which is more of an infiltration model. We didn't conquer the land. We infiltrated it. We came in and settled in the gaps between Canaanite cities. We took over we were shepherds, so we took the pasture lands in between in uninhabited areas, and we lived in and among the neighbors, and we lived in and among the peoples of the land. Now that raises, first of all, by the way, archaeologically, that's the right story. There is no evidence that we conquered the land. There's evidence that Jericho didn't have walls when Jericho was supposed to have. The walls of Jericho came down. That's archaeologically. Archaeologically, there's evidence that tribes came, that nomadic Semitic tribes came and infiltrated the land and became the Israelites. That's who we are, right? So archaeologically, that's true. But here's the bigger question, and I'm glad you raised it. Ready? What if the other guys were right? What if the 10 were right, not the 2? We always praise the 2, Caleb and Joshua, faithful to God, faithful to the self-esteem of the Jewish people, leaders of the conquest. Oh yeah? Maybe the land really was pretty dangerous. Maybe the land was dangerous, but not physically. Maybe the land was dangerous culturally. What if they were right? I mean, think for this for just a second, right? The myth that we conquered all the peoples of the land is there because they were afraid that the peoples of the land would be a snare. That's the language in the Bible. They would be a trap. We would start worshiping their gods. We would start marrying their daughters and sons. We would start having Christmas trees instead of menorahs, We would start being like, we would assimilate into the culture of the land. Maybe that's the threat. And maybe that's a threat we overlooked because we were so proud of Joshua and Caleb. We didn't listen carefully to the other threat, because that's what the book of Judges is really about. The book of Judges, which is this really strange book of the Bible, a very strange book of the Bible, is really about the cultural interactions, the cultural transactions between the Israelites and the Canaanites they lived among. And guess what? We started becoming like them. And in every archaeological excavation of ancient Israel, every one, wherever we found cities where ancient Israelites lived, in every house, in every city where ancient Israelites lived, we found little statuettes of Baal and Ashtarte, the Canaanite gods. Baal is a bull, sometimes with a phallus. Astarte is a woman with a pregnant belly and large breasts, the female goddess and the male god. In every, and if you read the prophets and how much the prophets rail against the worship of foreign gods, maybe it really was a dangerous land. Not physically, not militarily, but culturally. Maybe we should have listened to these guys after all. It just becomes a really interesting question on a whole different level. On a whole different level. And then if, I see it, Douglas. Then if you push it one more level farther, to the last level, we talked about Pshat, Drash, Remes, Sod. Pshat, what happened? Drash, what's the religious moral idea? Remes, how does this speak to me psychologically? Sod is universal. Sod is universal, right? What does it take for good to conquer evil? And what happens when good confronts evil? And what is the fear of the good to confront the evil? When do you confront evil and when do you not? And when is the confrontation between good and evil successful and when is it unsuccessful? And how does evil really defeat good? Maybe evil doesn't have the military might to defeat good. Maybe good has God behind it and God will smash these bad guys. But maybe evil has a nasty habit of sort of leaching out of the soil and capturing you slowly. Maybe what makes it Eretz Ochelet Yoshveha, a land that eats up its inhabitants, not all at once, but slowly. And the thing to watch out for isn't evil as a fortified city, evil as a giant who's going to destroy you, but evil as a slow process of contamination. Maybe that's the problem. But just consider that as one of the deeper secret meanings of this Torah text. All right, we got another minute.
Can you view this all as a failure of God and Moses?
Oh, gosh, yes.
An inadequacy of preparing the people.
It's worse than that. God doesn't know people. Don't you understand? The Torah is not our job. Everybody thinks the Torah is the story of how our people came to know God. That may be true, but the more interesting story is how God came to know us. God doesn't know it. Remember Cain and Abel? Like, Cain's like sharpening his weapon, and God says, what are you doing? And God says to him, be careful. Jealousy's pretty powerful. Be careful. God is learning human beings. So what did God think? Now, God here represents a certain quality of leadership, right? If I take him out of Egypt with enough miracles, and I cross the Red Sea with enough special effects, and I bring them to Mount Sinai, and I make it quake, and I give them Torah, and I give them manna, and I give them miracles, and I bring them to the land, they're a free people. Right? And what did God discover? You can take the people out of Egypt, but you can't get the Egypt out of the people. You can take them, you can free their bodies, but to free their spirits, their souls, their minds, takes a lot more work. It's much easier to free a person's body, and it's so easy for a person's body to be free, but his mind to be a slave. Right? We talked about this last week, right? 31 flavors, and everybody chooses vanilla. Right? Right? 31 flavors. And by the way, if we told you, you must choose vanilla, that's the Soviet ice cream shop, right? You would protest and say, no, I'm an American, I demand freedom, I demand 31 flavors. So you say, okay, you get 31 flavors. Good, I'll have vanilla. That's the problem. So what is God learning? What are we learning? What does this Torah teach you if you're a leader?
You can go a little ahead of your people, but you can't go too far.
You've got to elevate this people. You've got to elevate the way they see themselves in the world. We were grasshoppers, and so we appeared to them. You got to. How do I undo that mentality? How do I teach people to accept the gifts of freedom, even though it scares the hell out of them? How do I get them to understand that it's their responsibility to step forward? This is a slow process of maturing and developing. And we're not done yet. We're not done yet, right? We're still in the process. And by the way, I'll get political, Michael, so you don't think I'm totally oblivious. Yeah, no, I will. I think America isn't yet finished figuring out what Jefferson meant in the Declaration. I think we're still trying to figure out and still trying to live up to Thomas Jefferson. I don't think America has yet reached the level of Thomas Jefferson's vision of democracy. I really think we're struggling. Every day we're struggling. You want to say something?
No, I just, James Parks wrote a book called History of the Jews. Are you familiar with James Parks?
Yeah.
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 And in which he states that it was Jacob and his children he went to Egypt.
Right.
Leaving behind what he called the Bnei Israel. It was a tribe called the Bnei Israel.
Yeah, this is an archaeological theory that not all of us went into Egypt. We went from Canaan to Egypt, but not everybody went.
And so when we came back, it wasn't an invasion. It was more or less a rejoining of the people with the Israel, and therefore it was a normative kind of thing accepted by the Canaanites. And
Not all the Canaanites.
well, maybe not all the Canaanites.
No, they're not.
I don't think there were many Israelites.
No, it was the theory goes, if you read the 23rd chapter of the book of Joshua, he has a covenanting ceremony. And it's very odd, and the language of it's very odd. So the theory is that you had tribes of originally from Mesopotamia that infiltrated Canaan. That's Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Okay? Then some of them went down into Egypt and stayed there for some time and then came back. And then in the 23rd, 24th chapter of Joshua, that's when they're reunited into a people. And everybody adopts the story of being slaves in Egypt, even though not everybody went. And they begin to develop, they merge their religious perspectives. The religious perspectives that were gained in the desert, from the desert journey, with the religious perspectives that were gained living in the land, and the hybrid of those two perspectives gives you Israelite religion. That's the theory. That's the theory. It's a very interesting theory, right? Because we tend to do this, we tend to adopt common narratives and share our common narratives, which I think is a lovely, it's a nice thing. You say, what does it mean to say I'm a Jew? You say I was a slave in the land of Egypt. That becomes the narrative. What does it mean to be an American? It means I came over on the Mayflower. No, we all came over on the Mayflower. That's what it means to be an American. My ancestors came seeking liberty, running away from tyranny. We found a forbidding land. Providence of God gave us this land. That's the American narrative. To become a member of a group is to adopt its narrative. So that's why I started the question. But this is such a complex narrative. Why tell this narrative? It's such a nasty narrative. It's such a bad thing to say about ourselves. Except if you want to say that we are a people in process. We recognize that learning to be free is a lifelong process. That learning to be confident, that gaining the dream, it's not the promised land. It's not a promised land. Remember, this was written in Babylon. It's not a promised land. The promised land is in here. It's gaining a sense of what it means to be God's people and living that life of mitzvah, living that free life, living this life in covenant. That's the great promised land. And that's something that we're still learning how to do. We're not quite there yet. Marcia, you get the last comment because I really got to go daven this morning. Because if I keep going, I'm going to miss even Musaf. It's not that people would rather be taken care of than have freedom. I think it's just it's a temptation. It's a tendency. It's a tendency. Again, pull me into politics again. But somebody comes along and says, I have the solution to all of your problems. It's tempting, right? It's a political season, so we're going to have a whole summer of this, But we'll see what happens. But the question is, here is my dream. I am responsible to reach for it. And I'm going to find the strength to overcome my fear of what that might mean for me, because that dream is so compelling. You never become unafraid. You never lose the fear. We all have fear. We all have fear. But you have the courage to move forward. Courage doesn't mean you have no fear. Courage means you have a drive to move through your fear and past the fear and embrace the thing that's your dream. That's courage. The Jewish people, the Israelites, have fear, but they don't have courage yet. We'll come back in 40 years and they'll have courage. But that's next week's story. Thank you. How did we get onto that? Where are you going? Shabbos. Good to see you. Is what?